Imagine you're young, just finished studying or training, eager to start your life.
Yeah.
But the jobs you find,
Yeah.
they're temporary, maybe month-to-month contracts.
Yeah.
You just can't plan anything.
Right. No stability. Can't get a loan, maybe.
Exactly. Or worse, you're doing unpaid internships,
Yeah.
just trying to get a foot in the door. And it ends up costing you well over €1,000 a month just to live while you're working for free. It's quite something.
Wow. Yeah, that's a reality that really hits young people across Europe pretty hard, doesn't it?
It does. And this kind of deep instability, it's not just about money. The research we've been exploring shows it's having a really direct, quite damaging effect on their mental health, leaving them feeling incredibly uncertain about what's next.
Exactly. And understanding these pressures is, well, it's vital because they don't just affect the individual, do they? They connect to these bigger societal things, including, maybe surprisingly, how vulnerable some people might become to harmful ideas.
This is the Daily Download, where we explore the stories and data shaping our world. I'm Ian.
And I'm Andra.
And today, we're going to examine some of the really complex challenges facing young people in Europe. We're talking mental health, job security, or insecurity, rather, housing instability.
Yeah, the big ones.
And how all these intense pressures might sort of intersect with vulnerability to radicalization and hate.
We've been looking into some really interesting research on this lately, haven't we?
We have. There's definitely a lot to unpack here.
Okay, so let's start with that reality of work. You mentioned a term that kept cropping up in the research. Precarious work.
Right, precarious work. And what the studies we looked at really drive home is that this isn't just, having a job that might not last.
No.
For young people, it often means contracts that literally need renewing every single month.
Wow.
Or having hours that change completely unpredictably week to week.
So no routine.
None. Getting shifts offered last minute and feeling like you just can't say no because, well, you don't know when the next shift will come.
Gosh, that sounds like constant gnawing uncertainty.
It really does. And it sounds incredibly stressful.
Yeah, and studies back that up, like those from the European Agency for Safety and Health at Work, EU OSHA, they call it.
EU OSHA, right.
They consistently show this clear, quite stark connection between these precarious conditions and a real deterioration in mental health for young workers.
And here's a key point.
Yeah.
Young people are disproportionately stuck in these jobs.
Ah, so it hits them hardest.
Yeah, the research shows they're the group most likely to be facing this kind of constant precarity, much more than older workers.
And you mentioned unpaid internships earlier. That adds another layer, doesn't it?
It really does. The idea might be getting experience, but the research points out this huge financial burden.
Yeah, the €1,000 a month figure you mentioned.
Exactly. It's estimated that, on average, an unpaid internship costs a young person over €1,000 per month in living expenses they have to cover.
While getting paid nothing.
So they're basically paying to work.
Pretty much. Paying for the chance of a future job. And that just fuels that insecurity we talked about and definitely impacts their mental well-being.
So faced with all this pressure on young workers, what are the potential policy ideas coming out of the research?
Well, ideally, you'd reduce precarious work altogether, but the sources acknowledge it's the reality for many right now.
Okay.
So social welfare systems need a rethink, a fundamental one, like removing age-based rules that often block younger adults from getting support, like minimum income.
So treat them like other adults needing support.
Exactly. The sources stress making income support accessible, easy to get, even if you are in precarious work. Just making sure that basic safety net is actually there.
And what about helping them find better work?
Crucially, the research suggests moving beyond just getting any job. The focus needs to shift towards job quality.
And providing proper training that actually leads somewhere stable. There's also talk about bigger frameworks, like a proposed EU directive for an adequate minimum income.
Okay, what would that do?
The aim is to set common standards across the EU, making sure support is, well, adequate and easy for people who need it to actually access.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, let's connect this, because job insecurity doesn't exist in a vacuum, does it? The research highlights another huge pressure point, housing.
Absolutely. It's identified as a full-blown crisis in many parts of Europe, defined simply as, a massive lack of affordable housing, whether you want to buy or rent. And the studies we explored really pinpoint this housing shortage as a key driver of political alienation, especially among young people.
You can totally see why. If you can't afford a decent, stable place to live,
It affects everything.
yeah, fundamental life choices. The sources talk about pretty dramatic social consequences, young people delaying moving out on their own,
Putting off starting families.
directly impacting their mental health, which, as we said, links back to the job situation.
And there's this graying kind of deep belief that they just won't ever achieve the same living standards their parents did, that the milestones are out of reach.
Yeah, that sense of falling behind. And what's really insightful, I thought, from the research is this observation that some young people feeling the sharp end of the housing crisis start to connect the problem with things like inward migration.
Ah, okay. So looking for explanations or scapegoats.
Kind of. And this creates a fertile ground for populist parties who might then amplify that message, playing on those existing frustrations and anxieties.
Right. So it's complex. How do you even start to tackle a crisis like that? Did the sources offer solutions?
They did propose some pretty concrete, quite ambitious actions. Firstly, just a massive increase in construction.
Surely more houses.
Yeah, but building across all types of housing where there's demand. Building the right kind of housing, not just luxury flats, for example.
Okay. What else?
Secondly, rethinking how public money is used. Instead of schemes that might just push prices up or mainly help developers, the focus should be on using public funds to make sure housing options are genuinely available and affordable for people at all income levels, all ages, really tackling that core accessibility issue.
Makes sense.
And thirdly, to deal with that growing wealth gap between generations.
Yeah.
The research talks about fairly taxing existing housing wealth. It's framed as a way to kind of rebalance things, make sure housing isn't just driving inequality between age groups.
Okay, so we've got young people facing job insecurity, housing unaffordability, the mental health strain, feeling left behind, maybe excluded.
Yeah, a pretty bleak picture for some.
So how might these really intense feelings, the insecurity, the frustration, the alienation, how might they make some individuals more vulnerable to, well, harmful influences?
That's the really critical connection the research explores. It suggests that strengthening young people's resilience, basically, their ability to cope with stress and navigate these challenges, is absolutely crucial for countering violent ideologies.
Resilience as a buffer.
Exactly. When people feel adrift, unheard, insecure, they might be more open to narratives that offer easy answers, or a sense of belonging they're missing, or simple scapegoats for their problems.
And what's striking is how different extremist groups seem to be using similar messages now.
Yeah, that really stood out. Terrorists, violent extremists, even with different specific goals, they're increasingly sharing common themes.
Like what?
Things like anti-establishment messages, anti-elitism, this general sense that the system is broken or corrupt.
Okay.
And these messages can appeal to people from really diverse backgrounds, even those who don't fit neatly into a specific extremist box or didn't have a strong ideology to begin with.
And conspiracy theories play a role here, too.
Increasingly so, according to the research, they seem to be filling the gaps between different ideologies, acting like a common thread. These theories can offer a lens to view the world, especially if you feel insecure, and sometimes they provide the justification or motivation for violence, even if someone doesn't buy into the whole extremist package.
Yeah. Okay, let's broaden this out slightly. How do hate speech and hate crimes fit into this picture of tension and vulnerability?
Well, the research is clear. They're not just isolated incidents. They actively erode social cohesion. They increase tensions in society.
How is a hate crime defined in the sources?
Basically, it's any ordinary crime, assault, vandalism, harassment, whatever. But the motivation is key. It's driven, at least partly, by bias or hate against the group the victim belongs to.
And that group identity can be many things, right? Not just race.
Absolutely. The research emphasizes it's a wide range. Race, religion, sure, but also sexual orientation, disability, gender identity, national origin, lots of categories. Yeah. It's targeting someone, as one source put it, under the pretext that he was born belonging to a certain group.
And does it matter who is saying hateful things?
The research suggests it does. Hate speech from political figures or people in authority is seen as having a potentially bigger impact. Their words carry weight. Others might see it as giving permission, almost, or legitimizing hate, making it seem more okay to express prejudice or even act on it.
But tackling hate crimes isn't straightforward, is it? I remember reading about underreporting.
Yes, that's a huge challenge noted in the research. Why don't people report? Lots of reasons.
Right.
There can be real distrust in the police or authorities. Sometimes, sadly, victims perceive the authorities themselves as biased.
Okay.
There's also a deep fear of retaliation from the attackers if they report it.
Yeah, can you imagine?
Or fear of being re-victimized by the system not being believed, not taken seriously. Sometimes it's just not knowing how to report or feeling shame about being targeted.
So the authorities themselves need to be properly equipped.
Absolutely critical. The research stresses that investigators must be unbiased and well-trained. If they don't properly look into the bias motive, the perpetrator isn't held fully accountable for the hate aspect of the crime.
Which has wider implications for society.
Exactly. And this all ties into that tricky legal balance mentioned in the sources between protecting free speech and combating speech that genuinely incites hatred or violence. It's a line legal systems are constantly grappling with.
Okay, so shifting to how authorities are responding legally, especially thinking about terrorism, the focus isn't just on the attack itself anymore.
No, increasingly the legal frameworks, according to the sources, target actions before an attack happens.
Preparatory acts.
Exactly. Things like associating with others for terrorist purposes or, importantly, financing terrorism.
And how do these groups get money? Is it big, sophisticated operations?
Sometimes, maybe. But what's really fascinating and maybe a bit unexpected from the research is how often it's through what's called microcriminality.
Microcriminality?
Yeah, basically engaging in smaller, seemingly less significant crimes. Things like petty theft, stealing property, falsifying documents.
Like fake passports?
Yeah, using stolen passports is common. That's why databases like Interpol's SLTD, that's stolen and lost travel documents, and others like Find and Mind are so important.
Okay, what else? Drug trafficking, money laundering.
All of the above. Small-scale drug dealing, laundering small amounts of money.
Are there examples of this?
The sources give some. The Madrid train bombings in 2004, the 311 attacks, were partly financed by trafficking hashish, which was then traded for the explosives.
Wow.
Another example was a Salafist cell funding itself through burglaries, breaking into homes.
So it's blurring the lines between terrorism and ordinary crime sometimes.
It really does. It gets even more complex because sometimes these groups recruit ordinary criminals just for their skill.
Like car thieves.
Exactly. Someone who knows how to steal a car that could be used in an attack or act as a courier. And the worry, noted in the sources, is that sometimes these individuals, initially brought in just for their criminal know-how, can get drawn into the ideology.
Becoming followers or even?
Or even, in extreme cases, suicide bombers themselves. It's a disturbing pathway.
And prosecuting these cases must be hard.
Not always easy, no. There are challenges like getting intelligence info gathered by spy agencies admitted as evidence in court. It often doesn't meet the usual legal standards.
Right.
And international cooperation can be slow. Extradition between countries can take years. There was one notorious case mentioned, Rachid Ramda, linked to bombings in Paris. The UK took 10 years to extradite him to France.
A decade.
Yeah. And when it comes to sentencing for terror-related crimes, the legal analysis suggests the focus is often heavily on deterrence and incapacitation, locking people away for a long time.
Rather than rehabilitation?
Often, yes.
Yeah.
Especially if the acts are seen as driven by really deep-seated beliefs that are considered hard to change.
Okay, so bringing this all together, we have job insecurity, housing stress, mental health impacts, vulnerability to extreme ideas, hate crimes, complex legal issues. Given all that, how do we actually build resilience? How do we work towards a better future for young people in Europe?
The sources really come back to the importance of early interventions. Building up young people's resilience from a young age seems key.
Helping them withstand the pressures.
Exactly. Helping them resist the pull of harmful narratives.
And how do you do that?
Well, fostering positive identity development. Education and training that builds real skills and confidence helps. Ensuring strong support networks are the family, friends, community connections are vital safety nets.
And creating positive environments.
Absolutely. Promoting social cohesion, providing safe, inclusive spaces where young people feel they actually belong and are valued.
And things like youth work must be important here.
Hugely important. Youth work, community centers. They can provide spaces and support that actively promote inclusion, teach democratic values, encourage young people to get involved in positive ways.
And what about the bigger picture? Policy level stuff.
The research circles back to needing strong foundations, making sure adequate minimum income support is actually available, having social welfare systems that work and reach people, comprehensive anti-discrimination efforts, and also active counterspeech from authorities. It's not enough for leaders just to not use hate speech. They need to actively speak out against it.
Countering the negative narratives.
Precisely. And organizations working on the ground, like Caritas mentioned in the sources, they highlight social models based on strengthening families, building inclusive job markets that value everyone, and maintaining strong social safety nets.
Why are those pillars so crucial from their perspective?
Their view, based on their direct work, is that these are essential for reducing inequality and stopping poverty and disadvantage just being passed down from one generation to the next, which, as we've seen, can be where many of these problems start.
So ultimately, it's about creating a society where young people feel genuinely supported, included, and have a real tangible chance to build a stable, positive future. not feeling abandoned or pushed towards despair or alienation by these huge systemic challenges.
Absolutely. So to kind of bring it all together, we've really seen how economic insecurity, the housing crisis stress, the mental health pressures, they're all deeply tangled up for young people in Europe.
Yeah, interconnected challenges.
And these pressures can, unfortunately, increase vulnerability, while things like hate speech and potential radicalization threaten to undermine society as a whole.
So tackling those root causes the insecurity, the inequality, the lack of opportunity, and building resilience at every level, individual, community, policy. That seems to be the critical fight for a more hopeful future for Europe's youth.
It really does.
If you found this exploration insightful today, please do remember to like, subscribe, and maybe leave us a comment. It genuinely helps us get this information out to more people and keeps the conversation going.
And maybe as you reflect on what we've talked about, consider this. Given just how interconnected all these issues are from, an unstable job right through to mental well-being and potential vulnerability, what role can we as individuals and maybe our local communities play in actually creating those stable, inclusive environments that young people need to thrive rather than feeling pushed to the brink?
Something to think about. Until next time.